Welcome, aviation enthusiasts and history buffs, to Classic Duels, a captivating mini documentary series that takes you deep into the heart of the adrenaline pumping battles that unfolded in the skies during World War II. In this episode, we're in the skies above the Pacific Theatre in 1944 to 45, and we're going to talk about how aircraft from US Navy aircraft carriers sunk two of Japan's biggest battleships. Battleships Yamato and Musashi were the most powerful and heavily armed battleships ever built, designed by Japan to dominate the seas in the Pacific theatre during World War II. Their displacement, armour and firepower dwarfed all other battleships of the time. However, they were ultimately defeated by the US Navy's carrier-based aircraft, a dramatic shift that demonstrated how air power had become a decisive factor in naval warfare. Here's a detailed look at how the US Navy carrier aircraft neutralised both of these behemoths. Several key tactics would allow the relatively light carrier aircraft to take down these heavily armed and armoured battleships. Both the Yamato and Musashi were attacked in waves by large numbers of aircraft, which overwhelmed their defences. The carriers of the US Navy could launch multiple strikes in succession, which prevented the Japanese ships from recovering between attacks. The coordination between the dive bombers and torpedo bombers was crucial. Dive bombers distracted and damaged the ship's superstructure, knocking out anti-aircraft guns, while torpedo bombers delivered crippling blows to the hull, causing flooding and loss of buoyancy. Plus, you had Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighters that would also strafe the ships, which not only helped in reducing the ship's air defences, but also diverted attention from the bombers, whether it be from the guns of ships or from Japanese fighters. US bomber pilots were instructed to aim for critical areas like the engine rooms, and they later learned to stick to one side of the ships, making it nearly impossible for damage control crews to counter-flood effectively. The Musashi, the sister ship of Yamato, met its fate during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was one of, if not the largest naval air battle in history. As part of Japan's center force under Admiral Takeo Kurita, Musashi sailed into the Sibuyan Sea on October 24, 1944, with the goal of engaging the US invasion forces in the Philippines and preventing the American recapture of Leyte. The US Navy's Task Force 38, commanded by Admiral William F. Halsey, had numerous fast aircraft carriers loaded with carrier-based fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. The key to Musashi's demise was the relentless waves of air attacks that overwhelmed the ship's anti-aircraft defences. Aircraft from the carriers USS Intrepid, USS Essex, USS Franklin, and others participated in the strikes against Musashi. The first wave of air attacks began around midday on October 24th. Musashi was hit by multiple bombs dropped by Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers and Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. These early strikes caused significant damage, including flooding and a reduction in speed. However, Musashi's massive armour initially kept her afloat. As the day progressed, the American dive and torpedo bombers, with help from Hellcat fighters, continued to press their attacks in as far as possible in order to guarantee hits, and a well-coordinated series of strikes hit Musashi repeatedly, with about 15 torpedoes and over 16 bombs scoring direct hits by the end of the day. By the evening, Musashi had been critically damaged, with massive flooding and fires raging throughout the ship. Despite heroic efforts by her crew to counter-flood and keep her balanced, the damage became insurmountable. Musashi began listing heavily to port, and eventually capsized and sank around 7:30 p.m. Overall, Musashi's destruction was a clear demonstration of the potency of naval air power. Despite her immense armour and defences, concentrated air attacks neutralised her before she could even reach the American invasion fleet. The Yamato, the lead ship of her class, was deployed on a final desperate mission known as Operation Tengo in April 1945. As the Allies closed in on Japan, Yamato was sent on a one-way suicide mission to Okinawa to disrupt the American landings. The plan was for Yamato and her escorts to beach themselves and fight to the last as a stationary fortress. However, the US Navy intercepted Japanese communications, and they were ready. The US Navy's Task Force 58 under Admiral Mark Mitcher was tasked with intercepting and destroying Yamato before it could pose a threat. On April 7, 1945, carrier-based aircraft were launched from a number of American carriers, including USS Bennington, USS Hornet, USS Bunker Hill, and others. Just after 12:30 p.m., waves of American planes descended on Yamato and her escort ships. Just like with Musashi, the attack consisted of a mix of Helldivers and Avengers, and help from strafing Hellcat fighters. Yamato's anti-aircraft defences, although formidable, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of attacking aircraft. Key to sinking Yamato was the coordination of torpedo attacks. After the sinking of Musashi, the Avenger pilots learned that you're better off to concentrate all torpedo hits onto one side of the ship. This would make counter-flooding efforts much more difficult and prevent the battleship from staying balanced, thus sinking quicker. The dive bombers targeted the superstructure and deck areas, scoring direct hits that ignited fires and destroyed anti-aircraft guns, reducing Yamato's ability to defend itself against subsequent waves, and the bombs penetrated through the thick armour, causing severe internal damage. Over the course of the attack, Yamato was hit by around 10 bombs and 12 to 15 torpedoes. Torpedoes breached her hull, and water rushed into her lower compartments. The ship lost speed and became vulnerable to capsizing as damage control efforts failed. As the afternoon went on, the Yamato was listing severely. Her speed reduced to just a few knots, and her ability to defend herself had been nullified. A massive explosion occurred at 2:23 p.m., likely from her forward magazine detonating, and the ship broke apart and sank. Of her crew of over 3,000, only around 276 survived. The destruction of Yamato and Musashi marked the end of the era of the battleship as the dominant force in naval warfare. These massive ships, once the pride of the Japanese fleet, were overwhelmed by smaller, faster aircraft from distant carriers, showing that air power had become the dominant force at sea. This shift fundamentally changed naval strategy going forward, with aircraft carriers becoming the centerpiece of naval operations in modern navies. The post-war US careers of both the Avenger and Helldiver would be relatively short, as more versatile fighter bombers like the F-4U Corsair and later aircraft like the A-1 Sky Raider would take center stage due to their more capable performance and versatility. However, both the Helldiver and Avenger would serve with navies of several foreign nations, and the Avenger continued to serve in surveillance, anti-submarine, and utility roles. So that's it for this glimpse into epic struggles of the past. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with more riveting tales of aviation history, etc. Check out 2 videos at the end, all my CD reviews, or even the playlists I've created. Cheers.